All right, so let's get into our study. Okay, so we are in the middle of these chapters that describe the building of Solomon's temple. And as we said, we were actually, instead of going verse by verse, we were focusing on particular things. And we were in the middle of where I selected a few verses to kind of focus on and talk about them. So I have a few more of those verses that I want to discuss, and then we're going to go into a comparison of the temple vis-a-vis the tabernacle as was commanded in Exodus. So let's first start with 1 Kings chapter 7. Let's take a look at verse 13. King Solomon sent for Hiram and brought him down from Tyre. So first of all, we'll note that we have a guy whose name is Hiram, or Hiram, as we say it in Hebrew. And we met a Hiram before. There was a Hiram who's actually the king of Tyre. And we saw that going back to chapter 5, verse 21, when Hiram, no, let's look at it here, verse 15, okay? Chapter 5, verse 15, King Hiram of Tyre sent his officials to Solomon when he heard that he'd been anointed king in place of his father. And you'll recall that the Hiram, this king of Tyre, which of course is in Lebanon, when he is somebody who had a very special relationship with David, King David, and now is seeking to have a very special relationship with Solomon, and indeed is going to be very cooperative with Solomon, providing for him the cedars and other materials that he needs to build the temple. And we mentioned there, when we first met him, on the one hand, it seems like a wonderful relationship and isn't this very special? On the other hand, there were certain hints that maybe this wasn't so good. You know, is it a good thing to have these kinds of covenants with foreign kings? And we just kind of left that as a question mark that we were going to take up with. So here we have someone with the exact same name as the king, but he's a completely different guy. He's just a guy. He's not the king, but he's also from Tyre. Who is he? He was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father had been from Tyre, a coppersmith. He was endowed with skill, ability, and talent for executing all work in bronze. He came to King Solomon and executed all his work. So who is this guy? He is a regular guy with the same name as the king. He is from the same city. He's from Tyre, but he has particularly artistic talents working in copper and in bronze, and he is going to come now and help design or create all kinds of things for the temple. Now, I first of all, there is a similar verse which gives us a little bit more information in Second Chronicles. And, you know, we're not studying Second Chronicles per se, but it's very helpful to kind of go back and forth because every so often we get additional information in Chronicles that's referring to the same thing. So Second Chronicles chapter 2, verse 13. Okay, 1 second. And here we meet the same guy. And what does it say? He is the son of a Danite woman, a woman from the tribe of Dan. His father was from Tyre. Okay, so here we have Dan, and here we have Naphtali. So what does this mean? So if you look carefully at the way the Hebrew is written, it says, and I think the English is trying to kind of help that along, but it's clearer, I think, in the Hebrew. It says, he is the son of a widow from the tribe of Naphtali. It is not clear if from the tribe of Naphtali refers to the widow, his mother, or refers to him. Now, let us recall that a person is, how do you determine who a person is biblically? Okay. the tribe is defined by your father. Whether or not you're part of the nation of Israel is defined by your mother. Okay, and that certainly developed more strongly later on. But there's no question that once you are an Israelite, which tribe do you belong to? That's part of your father. So if we interpret the verse that way, that he is the son of a widow, and here in Kings we don't know who that widow is, where she's from, and he, meaning this man, Hiram, is of the tribe of Naphtali, which means his father was from Naphtali. Okay, and if we put that together with what we see in Second Chronicles, we will see that his mother was from the tribe of Dan, and his father was from the tribe of Naphtali. But the family lived in Tyre. Okay, so first of all, both Dan and Naphtali are northern tribes. Dan, by the way, was originally assigned the area that is today Tel Aviv, in the greater Tel Aviv area. But if you recall, there's a story in the book of Judges where they don't succeed in really settling their territory because it's an area where there's Philistines that kind of push them out. They end up, like, for example, Samson. Samson is from the tribe of Dan, and he and his family are in the area of what's it called? Eshtaol and Sorah. These are places that today these names are used. And if any of you know where Beit Shemesh is today, Beit Shemesh is southwest of Jerusalem. That is the area where Samson is from. And so it's really Judah. So what happened was, at that time in Judges, the tribe of Dan were kind of pushed out of the original Dan to the edges of Judah and eventually go north to find a better territory and end up, if any of you have ever been to Tel Dan in the north, in the upper Galilee, that's where the tribe of Dan ended up, which is why it's called Dan up there. And we know, especially at this period of time, during Solomon's time, we will have referenced from Dan to Beersheba. Dan, of course, by that time is all the way in the north. So Dan is in the north towards the east, and Naphtali is a little bit further west of there, also in the north. Tyre is further west. Tyre is a little bit further north of that, but further west because Tyre is on the sea, is on the Mediterranean. So there's a family story here, and a family story, and it's very interesting because, and you have to ask yourself this question, at the end of the day, does it really matter who made the copper and bronze instruments? You know, who this guy is? He never shows up again, and we don't see him previously. So you have to ask yourself, why did the Bible bother giving us a little genealogical history of this fella? And I think here we have, again, another hint that says to us, what's going on here? The story itself is extremely positive. There's this wonderful fellow. He's clearly of the tribe of the nation of Israel. His parents are both from tribes. He may live in Tyre, but he's not the Lebanese. He's not a tyrant or whatever you call it. He's an Israelite. And what could be better than an Israelite coming to dedicate himself and his talents to building beautiful vessels for the temple? On the other hand, there's a hint that you can then ask yourself, but wait a second, what's he doing in Tyre? What's he doing in Tyre? Nation of Israel, independent nation living in the land of Israel. Tyre is north of Israel. Tyre is a separate kingdom, 100%. What's he doing in Tyre? And so I find that what we're going to see here, and the hints begin here, end up being part of the problem that Solomon has at the end of his reign, and the fact that he marries 1,000 wives and there's actual pagan worship that comes in to the temple. And of course, after Solomon's death, the kingdom splits, and especially the northern kingdom is plagued with ongoing pagan worship. And there's very little break in the northern kingdom from this pagan worship. It goes on throughout in various ways. And I believe that these little hints, taking the time to give us a little bit of an information about this one family, gives us the hint. This is where the problem begins. Where does the problem begin? Number one, what's he doing in Tyre? And number two, we have two people who are of the Israelite tribes of Dan and Naphtali, who moved to Tyre and give their son the name of the king of Tyre. Like, why am I called Sondra? Why is my name not Sarah? Because I was born in America and my parents were dedicated Jews. They living in America, and that's the little bit of the influence that comes in from the other nations. And this is the beginning. This is the hint. And this is something that is Solomon's reign is considered the climax of Jewish autonomy and a time of peace and a time of strength in Israel, of the Jewish people, of the Israelite people. It is an amazing height. And yet, the Bible makes sure to give us a few hints to say, we are dealing with challenges all along. The challenges of the influence from the nations around us don't begin overnight. They're there even at the height of the glory. They're these little hints. And these are challenges that indeed will be something that the nation of Israel will be confronting all the time throughout the biblical period. We already saw during the period of the Judges, where we didn't have a king, where we had a mess. We had a mess from beginning to end. It was just a mess, and it kept getting worse. But then you think, okay, we have a king, we have United Kingdom, we have Saul, we have David, now we have Solomon. There's no reason, especially in Solomon's time, we practically had an empire. Why do you need to have influences from other nations? And yet here you see the very beginning of it. And that's just my perspective on this little detail, but I think to me it had meaning. Okay. So that's that. And then I want to go forward to chapter 7, verse 21. And here's interesting. I thought a little interesting bit. As part of the building of the temple, Solomon builds two particular columns. And I'll show you where those columns are in a minute, because when we start comparing, I have a diagram that I will show you of what the temple looked like. But he established, look at verse 21, chapter 7, verse 21. He set up the columns at the portico of the great hall. He set up one column on the right and named it Yachin. He set up the other column on the left and named it Boaz. Now, when I read this, I'm thinking, what the heck? I mean, beautiful columns, I get. And, we, of course, are also very exposed to, we can see it even today in Europe, Roman and Greek columns, and different kinds of structures. And you look at them and you go, wow, it becomes an expression of glory, very aesthetic. And so the fact of having these beautiful columns set up in the entrance to the temple is a wonderful thing. It makes sense. Why do you call columns by name? And I looked this up, and first of all, this is unique in the Bible. There's no other place in the Bible where somebody calls a column by name. Now, gates have names. That is everywhere. Even to this day, something I learned, in Israel, at least. I don't know if you have it this way in the States as well. I remember years and years ago, I went to a department store in the States, and it wasn't in a mall. It was just one of those freestanding, huge department stores with parking lots all around and several levels. And I was a real idiot because I hadn't been in such a store. We don't have stores like that in Israel. We just have like malls. And I totally forgot to make note of where I had entered. And so I had no way of knowing where my car was. Now in Israel, you're in a mall, and every entrance to a mall has a name. Okay, so you say, this is the Lotus Gate, this is the Lilac Gate, this is the Rose Gate. I don't know, they name these things. Why do they name them? Believe me, there's no meaning to those names. They named the gates as these entrances so that you remember where you parked your car. Just remember, I parked it at the Rose Gate, and then you're fine. But that is, do they have names of entrances to shopping malls in the States as well, or in Europe?
In the US, though, they often have north, south, east, or west.
Okay. So I
It's
guess
somewhere. And
I guess
they
just
also
Israel,
have
they have
numbers.
names.
They have numbers in the parking lot. So you can say I parked at B12 or
Yeah. Well, that we have too. But, knowing even which parking lot you're in, anyway. So it's very interesting because we have those names of gates, but we know from the Bible, we know from ancient Jerusalem, we have Jaffa Gate, we have the Dung Gate, and we have the Annapolis Gate, Damascus Gate. We have all these different gates. So that's common both in the Bible and in the ancient world, names of gates. But names of pillars is unusual. I looked this up, and there was one of these, today when you go into Google, none of the commentaries, by the way, talk about this. They talk about the meaning of the name, and we'll get to that, but none of them refer to, I didn't see anything that actually commented on the very fact of giving a name to a column. So I went into Google and I found nothing. And then in the last few days, at least in my Google, very often when you put in something in Google, it brings you up as the first entry AI, some kind of artificial intelligence. I don't know if it's ChatGPT or something else. Okay, so I put in that question and I said, is there any precedent for before Solomon's temple of naming columns? And they said, oh yes, there was precedent, but then there was no source for that statement. So I think in the end, I looked at the source of a different statement, and all it said was, yeah, it was very common to have columns. Well, we know it was common to have columns. I want to know if anyone had a name. So if you find something like that, great. I could not find any reference to a column with a name. So that remains, okay, what is this all about? What people do talk about is the meaning of the names. And I think that might be the answer to the question, why did he give these names? And there's a lot of different reasons. And I just, I chose one for each one that I happen to like, but there's tons and tons like that. So the first name is Yachin, and Yachin means to prepare, to establish, or to prepare. And it also means, like a certain establishment. That's the root. And there was a commentary that referred back to the book of Exodus, in the Song of Moses, I believe it is, Exodus 15, verse 17. And here it says, you will bring them, of course, this is the Song of Moses, and Moses talks on the one hand about how wonderful it is, the miracle that has just happened in the parting of the Red Sea and the drowning of the Egyptians. But then it kind of looks to the future and talks about what is God going to do with the nation of Israel. In verse 17, it says, you will bring them and plant them in your own mountain, or in the mountain of your territory, the place you made to dwell in, O Lord. Now, the word for place here is machon. Machon, so it's like yachin, it's from the same word. So it doesn't mean place in the sense of a geographical area, but like more an established venue, okay? Which is why it comes from that same word as established. And so here the idea meaning it's established. This is a place like this verse that talks about the verse continues, the place you made to dwell in, O Lord, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands established. So this is clearly, and the word for sanctuary actually in Hebrew is mikdash, or temple. So this is a verse that absolutely 100% refers to the building of the temple that will happen eventually after the nation of Israel comes into the land. And in saying that, it's using this as an expression of a place where God will dwell perhaps forever. Okay, so that is the meaning there. As you enter the temple, you are coming into a place where God has selected to dwell, where it has been established for God to be there. The name Boaz, now we know the name Boaz is actually the name of Solomon's great-great-grandfather, I think. Okay, so you could say, naming it after great-granddad back there, but probably not. I mean, maybe, but I don't think he would just, put if he was going to put someone's name on a pillar, he would put David's name on a pillar, his father. But I don't know, whatever. But the name Boaz itself has meaning. The name Boaz, especially the second part, the Az part or Oz part, talks about strength or power. And there's a reference, and then some people refer in that to Ezekiel, Ezekiel 24, verse 21. And again, this is a reference to the temple. And the verse is as follows. Tell the house of Israel, thus said the Lord God, I am going to desecrate my temple, your pride and glory. Now, the word for pride and glory, pride is gaon, uschem is your glory, okay? It could be glory, it could be strength. It doesn't really matter how it's translated in English, but the word used here to describe the temple is geon uschem, the pride of your power or glory, referring, of course, to how Israel saw it. They had pride. They felt that this was their crowning glory, this temple. So this could also reference the fact that this was an element of the temple. The temple was referred to as something that had this sort of glory, oz, glory or power. And so you could say Boaz is bo in it, within it was glory. Here is glory. So that is, again, just two of the meaning, the interpretations that I like, but there's many interpretations of this and connecting these particular names to different verses or to different meanings. But what they all have in common is that what Solomon was trying to do as you enter the temple, to label these pillars in such a way that would define the temple itself. You are going into a place where God has selected to place himself forever. You are going into a place that represents the glory of God and of the nation of Israel. So that, and that by looking at the definitions and the meaning of the word, you can come back to the question, why is he naming these pillars? And perhaps the answer to that is, as I said, so that as you enter, instead of saying on top of the pillars, you are now entering the dwelling of God where he has chosen to put his name. Instead, by putting these names on each pillar, you are representing that, in a much shorter, perhaps even more aesthetic way. Okay, one last thing that I want to refer to is in chapter 8, verse 4, we read as follows. They carried up the ark of the Lord. Then the priests and the Levites brought the tent of meeting and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. Okay, this is basically saying that there was already a tent, which we knew. What is the tent? The tent was the tent that David built around the ark, okay? And that was sitting in the city of David. We talked about it. And all these vessels that were already there. So we have here an understanding that David had prepared these vessels, not Solomon. There are other things that Solomon added to it, but some of the initial vessels that would have been vessels, let's say, that hark back to the vessels that were in the original tabernacle, that type of vessel, that were already prepared by David, and he brings them up to the temple after the temple is finished. And then again in verse 9, we have, there was nothing inside the ark but the 2 tablets of stone which Moses placed there at Horeb, when the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after the departure from the land of Egypt. So here you have the ark. This is the original ark that Moses had built. We followed that ark, okay? The ark came out of, it was built in the desert. It enters the land of Israel. It is laid to rest in Shiloh, where we have the tabernacle built. It is then taken by the Philistines, returned by the Philistines, and it's all kinds of trouble. It ends up being settled in the family in Kiryat Yearim, after which David brings it up to Jerusalem. First time he made a mess. The second time he did it right. He takes the ark up to Jerusalem and puts it in a tent near his palace in the city of David. And it's sitting there until now. And now Solomon is going to take the ark and the vessels surrounding that ark in the tent and bring them up to the temple. And I think there's something very significant here of the continuity, especially with the ark, the continuity that begins with Moses all the way to the temple. The ark is unbelievable continuity. And not only that, the tablets, the original 10 commandments, are sitting in that ark. So it's not just from Moses's time, but it is the word of God that was given to the nation, put in the ark. It's still there. It is a total continuity of the word of God to Moses and to the nation in Exodus until today in Solomon's time when he puts that into the temple. On the other hand, we also have a different sort of continuity, and that's the continuity between David and Solomon, where we learn, especially this is brought out in the in Chronicles, where we learn, we mentioned this last week as well, where we learn not only the way we learned in the book of Samuel that David wanted to build the temple and God said, no, your son will build it. But in book of Chronicles, we see that David, first of all, prepares some of the vessels, gets together some of the material ready, and gives very detailed instructions to Solomon. It's almost as if he'd already hired the architect. Okay, he got the plans. He got the construction engineer to figure out exactly how much cedar he needed, how much silver he needed, how much gold, how much copper, all that stuff. He figured that it's all planned, and he's handing Solomon all the architectural plans together with all the specifications so that Solomon can then just take it and implement it, order all the material and implement it. And we learn here also that there are actually some vessels that David has started to create. So that's a different kind of continuity, a continuity that began with David, who's the first one who really initiates the whole idea of building a temple, but he's not allowed to actually do the final building, and that gets hands over to Solomon. And that's, we'll end here today, but it's a perfect segue into what we are going to do next week. Because what we see here is a continuity, especially if we look at the first continuity. The second continuity is more of part of the legitimacy of Solomon. David is the original king. David is the founder of the house of David. It is particularly meaningful that when Solomon does something, especially something as significant as building the temple, it is seen as not just coming from the top of his head, but something that is started with David, that first king of Israel, the first one who was anointed by God to be the king forever. Saul was also anointed, but then God took away the kingship from his family and then established that David would be the eternal house of David, king of Israel. And so the fact that the temple plans and everything begins with David, and there's some continuity here that moves into Solomon and the temple, that's very significant. But the fact that also we have continuity from Exodus, from Moses, is also very important, which then, of course, begs the question. As we will see next week, there are significant differences in the temple and the tabernacle. And while it's based on the same principle and has the same basic elements in it, there are differences. There are quantitative differences for sure. The size is different. And we will go through some of those things that are very different. And then the question, of course, becomes is why the difference? And even more important than like why the difference, but the only time in the Bible that we have instructions laid out for us, and the way it's laid out for us is a forever kind of thing. How to build a temple is in Exodus. And when we see that Solomon's temple is different from the instructions of Exodus, we have to ask, how did that happen? And why did that happen? And is there any significance in this difference? So that's what we're going to be discussing next week. We're going to actually go through some of the differences, and then we're going to try to answer these questions about how and why and what the meaning is. So that's it for today. See you all next week. Any questions? Carol, unmute.
It wasn't me.
Sorry. Yeah.
Two points very quickly. This is probably why it took him so much less time to build the temple than his own palaces, because it was all done for him in advance. So all he had to do was to put it into practice. And the other thing
Yeah, but
is,
it took him, no, but it took him a long time to build the temple.
70 years? Is it
7 years.
Oh, it took him 7 years
But didn't it take him 13 years to
Took
build
him
the other?
13 years for his house.
for the house,
Yeah.
right? You're right, it did take longer.
And the other thing is, but it's allied, is that presumably there would be an overlap when David was still alive and Solomon, about 3 years, something like that. You probably find, it's just a thought, but he may have spent that time discussing the plans and sort of giving Solomon the benefit of his wisdom so that he could put into effect the plans that he'd drawn up and, as you said, the arrangements he'd made.
Well, the timing is not so clear because, first of all, the account in the book of Samuel, no, actually, the beginning of the book of Kings is very different. The beginning of the book of Kings, we have a dying David, literally on his last days, and having nothing to do with the temple there. But we see there that David, it is not at all clear to even Bathsheba or anybody in the nation that it's Solomon who's going to take over. And we have David only at the request of Nathan after there's a rebellion of Adoniah. Only then does David say, yes, Solomon is going to be the next king. And there's even a crowning. And it's like David dies right away after that. He's on his deathbed when that happens. On the other hand, if you read the account in Chronicles, David gets up in front of the whole nation and there's no hint of him being ill, okay, or dying. And he gets up there and he says, yes, this is my son, and he's going to be the next king. And then he gives instruction to Solomon as to how to build the temple. Okay, now I think you can put these two versions together. We always talk about the differences between the book of Samuel and Kings on the one hand and Chronicles on the other. Chronicles is written in Second Temple, and their whole focus is on the house of David and the understanding that the house of David began, is wonderful, is righteous, and continues forever. Okay, and this is written at a time when there is no more king. All right, so it's a whole different perspective. So it could be that he got up from his deathbed and was supported, and he made this announcement, and then he went back to bed and he died 2 days later. But the way it's presented in Chronicles, there's no mention of his illness because they need to focus on the power of David that is then transferred to the power of Solomon. So when exactly that instruction of the details of the temple happens, I don't know. Somewhere in there, okay? But it could be that it was at the very end of his days. And I have to think that it has to be around that time, because if he had instructed them years earlier, then Bathsheba would not have asked, oh my goodness, is Solomon really going to be king? You know, it wouldn't have been a question at that point anymore. So, but this is how you see the two different versions create slight problems in understanding that. Any other questions? Okay, so we will see you all again next week. Great to see you.